Don't move. Those words changed everything between the millionaire and the innocent young woman. What happened that night revealed deep desires neither could control. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what comes next will leave you speechless. Her hand trembled as she held the silver scissors against the long chestnut locks that cascaded down her back. The most luxurious salon on Fifth Avenue was welcoming her for the first time, and she could barely breathe under the weight of so many curious glances. That's when she felt his firm fingers gently wrapping around her wrist, the warmth traveling through her skin like an electric current. "Don't move. Don't. I promise to be gentle," the millionaire whispered with tenderness and desire to the pure and innocent young woman, his olive-green eyes reflecting something she had never seen before in anyone: vulnerability disguised as confidence. This moment marked the culmination of a transformation that had begun months earlier, as if fate had patiently woven an invisible tapestry connecting two souls that everything seemed to separate. How many chance encounters shape our existence without us immediately grasping their depth? This question now resonated in Emily's mind every time she thought back to that rainy March evening that had changed everything. 4 months earlier, Emily was still waking up at 5 in the morning in her small Brooklyn apartment, where the smell of coffee prepared by her grandmother Grace mingled with the aroma of homemade cookies she baked to sell at the local farmer's market. The 23-year-old woman carried on her delicate shoulders the weight of 3 jobs: receptionist at a medical clinic in the morning, cosmetics saleswoman in the afternoon, and on weekends she helped her grandmother Grace with orders of muffins and pastries. Her calloused fingers told the story of someone who had never known luxury, but her almond-shaped eyes held dreams bigger than reality allowed. She dreamed of studying interior design, of transforming empty spaces into welcoming homes, of offering people the comfort she herself had never had. Fate wove its first knot on a rainy March afternoon, when the medical office's computer system crashed and she had to stay late to manually reorganize files. Michael arrived at 8 in the evening, soaked by the downpour, his Italian suit clinging to his athletic body, but it was the expression of profound fatigue that touched her. At 40, the real estate entrepreneur carried the weight of an empire built with his own hands after losing everything in his youth. He had the marked jawline of someone who had learned not to trust easily, the rigid posture of someone who directed hundreds of employees across the United States. But at that moment, he seemed only an exhausted man seeking relief from a persistent migraine. She offered him a hot herbal tea while the secretary looked for his file, and something in the simplicity of that gesture disarmed his walls. They spoke for 20 minutes about mundane things: the storm, the chaotic traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge, the recipe for her grandmother's apple pie. When he left, he discreetly left a business card on the table. "If you need anything." She kept it without imagining that this small piece of paper would completely change the course of her life. In the following days, Emily found herself taking out that card from her wallet several times, absently running her finger over the relief of the thick paper and the elegant typography that read, "Michael Anderson, CEO, Anderson Real Estate Group." The sensation of warmth she had felt at the touch of his hand came back in waves, causing a troubling mixture of emotions that she tried to push away. "You're daydreaming again, my little one," Grandma Grace observed, placing a steaming mug in front of her. "Is it a boy making you smile like that?" Emily hastily put the card away. "No, just ideas for a project." Her grandmother's piercing gaze seemed to read her like an open book, but she didn't push. At 78, Grace Parker had lived enough to know that some secrets need time to ripen before being revealed. "You know," she said, sitting across from her granddaughter, "your mother also had that habit of smiling at angels when something inspired her." The mention of her mother, who had passed away 10 years earlier from a sudden illness, created a momentary silence. Emily was only 13 when Clara Parker had left them, leaving a void that neither she nor her grandmother had ever really filled. "I wish she was here to see that I'm managing," Emily murmured, staring at the amber liquid in her cup. "She sees it, honey, and she would be so proud of you. 3 jobs, savings for your studies, and always that smile." The conversation was interrupted by the phone ringing. It was the neighborhood pharmacy, calling to inform them that a medication for Grace was finally available. Emily mentally noted that this expense would have to be added to the already tight monthly budget. The first turning point came 2 weeks later, when Grandma Grace had a domestic accident. While preparing her famous cookies, she slipped on the wet kitchen floor and fell heavily, fracturing her hip. The operation was a success, but the hospital bills began to pile up like an insurmountable mountain. Emily reduced her sleep to 5 hours a night, accepting overtime wherever she could. Her dark-circled eyes betrayed her exhaustion, but her smile remained intact when she visited her grandmother in the hospital, bringing her books and small dishes prepared with love. One evening, as she calculated for the umpteenth time how to distribute her meager resources between medical bills, rent and medications, her gaze fell on Michael's card, almost forgotten under a pile of papers. Desperate, with no one to turn to, she gathered her courage and dialed the number, her heart pounding. He answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting. "Michael Anderson," his deep voice announced. Emily almost hung up, overwhelmed by the shame of asking for help from a virtual stranger. "Hello," he insisted. "Hello, this is Emily Parker, the receptionist from Dr. Williams' clinic. You came a few weeks ago for a migraine and—" "I remember you perfectly, Emily," he gently interrupted. "How are you?" The kindness in his voice made the young woman's last resistance give way. With tears in her eyes, she briefly explained the situation, apologizing several times for this intrusion into his life. "I understand," he said when she had finished. "Could you meet me tomorrow morning? I'd like to talk to you about a possibility." The next day they met in a discreet cafe near Central Park. Michael, impeccable in his navy blue suit, contrasted with Emily's tired appearance. But it was his gaze, devoid of pity and full of respect, that immediately struck her. He didn't offer money, he offered an opportunity. He needed someone to organize and decorate the new headquarters of his company on the Upper East Side. Someone with a fresh perspective, without the vices of traditional professionals. The salary would cover the medical expenses, and there would still be enough left to start the training she so desired. "But I have no professional experience in this field," Emily objected, stunned by the proposal. "Sometimes instinct is worth more than experience," Michael replied, handing her a folder. "I saw how you transformed that austere little waiting room into a welcoming space, just with a few plants and a rearrangement of the furniture. And the secretary told me about your sketches." Emily blushed. She often drew imaginary interiors during her breaks, never thinking that anyone would notice. In the 3 months that followed, she immersed herself in a universe where every detail cost more than her annual salary. She learned about New England pottery, noble woods, and fabrics from the best mills. She discovered that she had a natural talent for combining textures and colors, creating atmospheres that told stories. But she also discovered that his world was populated by people who looked at her with barely veiled disdain. The boss's protégé, as they whispered in the Carrara marble-lined corridors. On a particularly tense Monday morning, Emily arrived at the office to discover that her carefully selected fabric samples had been replaced by others, more conventional and 3 times more expensive. "A necessary little adjustment," explained Jessica Martin, Michael's main associate, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "These provincial suppliers you had chosen are not, let's say, up to our reputation." Emily felt her heart tighten. The fabrics she had selected came from a small artisanal workshop in Rhode Island, whose ethical work and commitment to sustainability she admired. "I understand your concern, Ms. Martin," she responded, striving to keep her voice calm. "But these fabrics tell a story that perfectly corresponds to the identity we want to create for this new space." Jessica let out a small, condescending laugh. "Identity, my dear. We're not selling stories, but prestige." That same evening, Emily was still working late, trying to find a compromise that would preserve her vision while appeasing Jessica's concerns. Michael surprised her, focused in front of her computer, a cup of cold tea forgotten beside her. "You should go home, it's almost midnight," he said, sitting across from her. Emily jumped. "I just wanted to finalize these modifications. Ms. Martin thinks that—" "I know what Jessica thinks," he interrupted with a tired smile. "But it's you I hired for this project. Show me what you had originally planned." For an hour she presented her vision to him, explaining how each choice responded to a specific intention. Michael listened attentively, asking pertinent questions that pushed her to deepen her reflection. "This is exactly what I was looking for without knowing how to formulate it," he finally concluded. an atmosphere that reconciles elegance and authenticity, luxury and consciousness. Stay your course, Emily. I trust you. That evening, returning home, Emily felt a new determination being born. For the first time, someone believed in her professional vision, without conditions or reservations. And this trust was worth all the diplomas in the world. Michael perceived every sideways glance, every whispered comment, and he developed a feeling for her that began as admiration for her resilience and transformed into something deeper. The way she treated the janitors and cleaning women with the same courtesy she accorded to the executives. The way her eyes lit up, seeing a project take shape. The authentic laugh that escaped her when she tasted one of her grandmother's cookies that she brought hidden in her bag. The first serious obstacle arose when his associate Jessica, a sophisticated 45-year-old woman from Boston who had known him since his Yale days, began to sow poisonous doubts. She warned him of irreparable class differences, of how Emily would never truly adapt to this world, of rumors that were circulating tarnishing the company's reputation. He listened in silence, his jaw increasingly tense. But something in these words found an echo in his own fears. "She's charming, Michael. No one denies that," Jessica insisted during a lunch at the Waldorf Astoria. "But let's be realistic. This girl comes from another world. She doesn't have the codes, the network, the education necessary to evolve in our circles." Michael slowly put down his wine glass. "And what are these precious codes, Jessica? Those that make us spend a fortune on appearances, those that make us despise people who work honestly? Don't be naive," she sighed. "You've worked too hard to rebuild your reputation after your divorce. You can't afford a scandal now." These words touched a sensitive nerve. Michael had indeed struggled for years to pick himself up after his ex-wife had left him for his partner, taking half of his assets and a good part of his trust in humanity. That evening, he cancelled their planned dinner, using the excuse of an urgent business call with Chinese investors. Emily accepted the excuse without question, but the sudden distance in his voice made her understand that something had changed. In the days that followed, Michael showed himself to be courteous but distant, focusing exclusively on the professional aspects of their collaboration. Emily felt her heart tighten, but redoubled her efforts on the project, channeling all her emotions into her work. It was during an impromptu visit to Brooklyn to deliver some documents to her that everything shifted. Michael, arriving without warning, found Emily and her grandmother preparing cookies in the tiny kitchen of their apartment, flour on their cheeks, laughing like schoolgirls. Grace, recovered from her operation but still walking with a cane, welcomed him with the characteristic warmth of simple people for whom hospitality is second nature. "Come in, Mr. Anderson. Emily has told me so much about you. Come taste these cookies while they're still warm." Michael found himself sitting at the small formica table, listening to Grace recount how her granddaughter, at 8 years old, was already redesigning the layout of their apartment on scraps of paper. How, at 12, she had transformed an abandoned armoire into a magnificent bookcase with just some recovered paint and a lot of imagination. "She's always had this gift," the old lady confided, looking at her granddaughter with a gaze full of pride. "Seeing beauty where others see only the ordinary." Observing Emily in this environment, without facade or pretense, Michael felt the last barriers around his heart crumble. He understood that what he had been desperately seeking, authenticity, warmth, joyful simplicity, was found precisely in this small apartment, without luxury, but filled with love. The second turning point occurred during the launch of the new headquarters, a June night when the panoramic terrace revealed New York illuminated like a terrestrial constellation. Emily wore her first evening dress, simple but elegant navy blue, chosen with the help of her grandmother. She felt out of place among the real jewels and haute couture dresses, until he crossed the room ignoring all the important guests and held out his hand. "Dance with me." At that moment, under the starry sky and the scandalized murmur of the New York elite, he declared without words that he had chosen his side. The orchestra was playing a languorous jazz tune. Emily, trembling, slipped her hand into Michael's. "Everyone is looking at us," she whispered, aware of the gazes fixed on them. "Let them look," he replied, leading her to the center of the dance floor. "Tonight, we're celebrating not only the opening of this building, but also your vision that made it possible." She looked up at him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. You've created something extraordinary here, Emily. A place that perfectly reflects our values. Elegance without ostentation, luxury with consciousness, tradition embracing innovation. Their bodies naturally drew closer to the rhythm of the music, and Emily felt a wave of warmth invade her. All her uncertainties seemed to dissolve in this suspended moment. I didn't just want to thank you professionally, he continued, his voice slightly husky. I also wanted to tell you that you've transformed much more than these spaces. You've transformed my way of seeing things. At the other end of the room, Jessica observed the scene, her champagne glass clutched in a tense hand. Near her, a group of Japanese investors followed the dance with undisguised interest, one of them leaning in to ask the identity of this young woman who so captivated their host. The dance ended, but Michael kept Emily's hand in his, guiding her towards the large bay window that offered a breathtaking view of the Empire State Building glittering in the night. I have something to ask you, he said, pulling a small envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. Emily opened it with trembling fingers to discover a brochure from the Parsons School of Design with a handwritten note. Your application has been accepted. The expenses are covered. Your talent deserves to be nurtured. With tears in her eyes, she looked up at him with an incredulous gaze. How did you? I simply presented your portfolio. The rest, it's uniquely your talent that did it. She remained silent for a moment, divided between gratitude and a form of resistance. I don't know if I can accept. It's too. Consider it an investment, he gently interrupted, in exceptional talent. In a future I would like to see unfold. Near me, if you wish it too. The world around them seemed to have vanished. There were only these two souls, suspended in a moment of absolute truth, where social masks finally fell to reveal the essential. But his past hid shadows that had yet to come to light. The third turning point revealed that his fortune had been built on the ruins of a marriage broken apart 10 years earlier, when his wife had abandoned him in the most difficult moments for a partner who had betrayed him by taking half of their resources. The pain of that period had shaped his way of loving, always with one hand extended and the other protecting his heart. He trusted in business, but feared in emotions. It was during a weekend at his country house in the Hamptons that Michael fully confided in her. They were walking in the orchard, ripe apples perfuming the autumn air, when he began to speak of Diana, his ex-wife. We met at Yale. She was studying law, I was in economics. We thought we were invincible, destined to conquer the world together. He picked up a fallen apple, turning it between his fingers before continuing. At the beginning, everything was fine. Our first business, a small real estate agency, was beginning to prosper. Then came the financial crisis of 2008. We lost everything in a few months, our office, our apartment, our savings. Emily listened in silence, respecting the rhythm of his confidences. I was determined to start again, to rebuild stone by stone, but Diana couldn't bear the idea of starting from scratch. She began seeing my partner, Philip, who had miraculously managed to save his personal investments. One morning I woke up with a letter on the pillow and an empty bank account. He threw the apple far away, the gesture betraying an anger still alive despite the years. The worst wasn't the romantic betrayal, but the way they used my ideas, my contacts, to launch their business while I was struggling with debts. Emily approached gently, placing a hand on his arm. How did you manage to bounce back? Michael smiled, a smile where pride mingled with a certain melancholy. I worked day and night. I accepted consulting assignments that no one wanted, projects in areas considered too risky. I bet on ecological real estate before it was fashionable. And above all, I learned to trust only myself. This last phrase floated between them like a warning, a reminder of the walls he had built around his heart. And yet, you trusted me, Emily murmured. You entrusted me with a crucial project without really knowing me. He turned to her, his green gaze suddenly vulnerable. Because I saw something in you that I had lost, the ability to believe in the beauty of possibilities despite difficulties. That evening, huddled in front of the crackling fireplace, their bodies found each other in an intimate dance, where the scars of the past finally began to heal at the touch of present tenderness. Emily had to confront her own inner obstacle, the fear of not being enough. She had grown up hearing that people like her didn't belong in certain places, didn't deserve certain dreams, and now she was being courted by a man whose watch cost more than her grandmother's house in Brooklyn. How could she accept without feeling like she was betraying her origins? How could she allow herself this love without thinking it was disguised charity? These doubts gnawed at her even as she began her studies at Parsons. Among her classmates, many came from wealthy families, with parents who were architects or designers. Emily, despite her obvious talent, felt like an imposter, constantly fearing being unmasked. One day, after a particularly challenging class, where she had to present her project in front of everyone, she found herself in the bathroom, trying to calm her rapid breathing. "You're doing pretty well for someone who comes from nowhere." The voice belonged to Julie Matthews, daughter of a famous interior designer and niece of a senator. Emily stiffened, unable to respond to this barely veiled provocation. "I heard that your sponsor is Michael Anderson. An interesting choice for climbing the social ladder." Emily felt her face flush. "I'm no one's protégé." Julie arched a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Really? Then how do you explain your late admission outside the normal procedure? How do you explain this Upper East Side apartment that you now share with your grandmother?" "We're not naive, dear." The words hit her like slaps. How did they know about the apartment? Michael had indeed suggested that Grace and she move to a more comfortable place, with an elevator and home care for her grandmother. Emily had accepted, but only as a temporary solution, insisting on contributing to the rent as soon as possible. That evening, unable to concentrate on her assignments, she decided to confront her demons. She went to a student party at a bar in the East Village, determined to prove that she could integrate without Michael's protective shadow. The hours passed in a whirlwind of superficial conversations and glasses of cheap wine. Emily laughed too loudly, spoke too quickly, desperately trying to bridge the invisible gulf that separated her from the others. "You seem lost." The deep voice made her start. Next to her stood Mark, an assistant professor whose scathing critiques were feared by all the students. "Not at all," she lied. "I'm having fun." "You know," he said, coming a little too close, "I could help you navigate this world. Give you some private advice." The insinuation was clear, repugnant. Emily backed away, bumping into the bar behind her. "No, thank you. I'm doing just fine on my own." She left the party shortly after, walking in the rain until her tears mingled with the drops on her face. She felt dirty, not because of Mark's proposition, but because of her own pathetic attempt to pretend to be someone else. Arriving at the Upper East Side apartment, she found her grandmother asleep in front of the television. Emily sat down beside her, observing this wrinkled face that had gone through so many trials without ever losing its dignity. "How do you do it, Grandma?" she murmured. "How do you stay so true to yourself when the whole world pushes you to change?" The second external obstacle came in the form of a fabricated scandal. A tabloid published an article insinuating that she had used special favors to conquer her position. The words were cruel, the insinuations even more so. She wanted to abandon everything, return to her simple life where no one questioned her integrity. It was Grandma Grace, with the wisdom of someone who had lived 8 decades among American traditions, who prevented her. "Running away doesn't erase the lie, my child. It only confirms the cowardice of the one who invented it." The morning the article came out, Emily woke up to an avalanche of notifications on her phone. Messages from classmates, former colleagues, even suppliers with whom she had worked for Michael's headquarters. All were sending her the same link to an online tabloid known for its dubious methods. With trembling hands, she opened the article. The title alone made her nauseous. Romance and Renovation. How a receptionist climbed the social ladder thanks to very special skills. The article was a tissue of lies and insinuations, embellished with stolen photos of her and Michael during various events, their proximity presented as proof of an immoral and calculated relationship. Emily collapsed on her bed, unable to breathe properly. How would she face her professors, her classmates? How could she ever be taken seriously in this environment now? The door to her room opened gently, and Grace entered, a breakfast tray in hand. "I saw the article," she said simply, placing the tray down. "You need to eat. You don't fight dragons on an empty stomach." Emily shook her head, tears flowing freely. "There's nothing to fight, Grandma. It's over. I'll leave school, find another job, maybe in another city where no one will know me." Grace sat on the edge of the bed, her usually gentle gaze suddenly sharp. "Since when do Parkers run from difficulties? Your mother fought until her last breath. Your grandfather rebuilt our bakery after the fire when everyone told him to give up. And you want to leave because of the gossip in a newspaper that even fishmongers refuse to use to wrap their goods? The old woman took her granddaughter's hands in hers. Running away doesn't erase the lie, my child. It only confirms the cowardice of the one who invented it. These words, pronounced with a quiet conviction, acted like a balm on Emily's wounded soul. She squeezed her grandmother's wrinkled hands, drawing from this strength that had crossed generations. Later in the day, as she mentally prepared herself to face the outside world, Michael arrived, his face tense with anger. "My lawyers will attack this rag," he announced, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Defamation, invasion of privacy, fabrication of evidence, they'll regret ever having heard our names." Emily watched him, touched by his protective reaction, but also worried about the consequences. What if that only makes things worse? The more you defend yourself publicly, the more people will think there's something to hide. Michael stopped, struck by the accuracy of this observation. "Then what do you suggest?" "I'll continue to work," she replied with a new determination. "To study, to create. My best defense will be my work itself. Those who truly know me will know the truth. The others—" She shrugged, a simple gesture that revealed a new maturity. "The others will eventually get bored and find another target for their gossip." Michael approached her, admiring this unexpected wisdom. "I don't know if I would have had this strength in your place." "I have a good teacher," she smiled, indicating Grace, who was preparing tea in the kitchen. 8 decades of New York life have taught her that media storms pass, but the truth remains. The 4th turning point brought unexpected help. Other professionals who had worked with her, architects, suppliers, workers, began to give public testimonials about her ethics and talent. The dossier spontaneously assembled by these ordinary people dismantled the accusations piece by piece. And Michael, who had always solved problems with money and power, learned that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the community we build with authentic respect. The first person to publicly defend her was Mr. Johnson, a 67-year-old woodworker who had crafted custom furniture for the company headquarters. In an interview given to a respected architecture blog, he described how Emily had spent hours in his workshop learning about different types of wood, how she had insisted that the artisans be credited by name in the building's presentation brochure. "This young lady has a respect for craftsmanship that I've never seen in decorators of her generation," he affirmed. "She knows the value of work well done because she's lived it herself." Other testimonies followed. The lead architect who recounted how she had defended convivial common spaces against more profitable individual offices. The site manager who evoked Emily's regular visits, always attentive to the workers' conditions. The building's doorman who mentioned the small attentions she had for everyone, from the night guard to the delivery person. This spontaneous movement of support had a much more powerful impact than any legal action. More serious media began to take an interest in the story from a different angle, that of a talented young woman victim of professional jealousy. Michael observed all this with a mixture of relief and wonder. One evening, as they dined quietly at his home, he shared a reflection that troubled him. "All my life, I believed that problems were solved with money, lawyers, or power. I was ready to spend a fortune to stifle this scandal." He swirled his wineglass, thoughtful. "Yet it's the simple truth of who you really are, reflected by ordinary people you treated with respect, that had the greatest impact." Emily smiled, touched by this recognition. "It's what Grandma has always taught me. Treat each person as if they wore an invisible crown. You never know what trace you leave in others' lives." During this difficult period, Emily found refuge in her work at school. Her projects became more personal, deeper, exploring themes of identity, belonging, spaces as reflections of the soul. Her main professor, initially skeptical of her abilities, became her most fervent defender after seeing how she transformed controversy into creativity. Michael, for his part, underwent a profound inner transformation. The events had shown him the limits of his worldview, based on control and financial power. Through Emily, he was rediscovering another form of power, that of authentic human connection, of assumed vulnerability, of shared trust. One Saturday, he took her to visit a dilapidated building in the Bronx, a former textile workshop abandoned for years. "What do you think?" he asked, observing her reaction. Emily walked through the immense space, touching the peeling walls, the rusty metal beams, her imagination already bubbling. It's magnificent. These heights, this natural light. We could do something incredible here. Michael smiled, satisfied. That's exactly what I thought. Do you plan to buy it to renovate and resell? She asked, curious about his project. No, I was thinking more of a foundation, a place that would offer training in crafts and design for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, a place where talent could flourish regardless of social origin. Emily's eyes widened in surprise. It's a wonderful idea. But it's a huge investment, with no direct financial return. Some returns aren't measured in dollars, he replied simply. I've learned that recently. During the period of a year and a half that followed, important events marked their transformation. She obtained her interior design diploma from Parsons School of Design, opening a small studio that served clients from all social classes. He launched a social program offering scholarships to young people from peripheral neighborhoods to study architecture and construction. Together, they created a project that renovated homes for needy families in the Bronx and Harlem neighborhoods, combining his technical knowledge and her aesthetic sensibility. The day of her graduation ceremony was an exceptional celebration. Grace, radiant in her specially purchased sky blue suit for the occasion, could not contain her pride seeing her granddaughter receive compliments from the jury for her final project. The conceptual rehabilitation of a working-class neighborhood into a community living space that preserved industrial history while offering comfort and modernity. Michael, sitting discreetly at the back of the room, observed the scene with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. In 2 years, this young woman had not only achieved her professional dreams, but had completely transformed his vision of success and accomplishment. The party organized that evening in their Upper East Side apartment gathered an improbable mix of worlds. The Brooklyn neighbors, school peers, artisans Emily had worked with, some of Michael's wealthy clients. This diversity, far from creating discomfort, generated a vibrant energy, authentic conversations, exchanges that transcended usual social barriers. "Did you see?" Emily whispered to Michael, pointing to Mr. Johnson, the woodworker, in deep conversation with a famous Japanese architect. They've been talking about the relationship between tradition and innovation in woodworking for an hour. Michael smiled, squeezing her hand in his. "You've always had this gift for creating bridges between worlds. That's what made me fall in love with you." It was the first time he had spoken these words. Emily felt her heart race, but before she could respond, Grace was tapping on her glass to attract everyone's attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," announced the elderly lady, her gaze bright with emotion, "to my granddaughter, who proves to us that dreams know no social boundaries. And to all those who have supported her on this path, especially this gentleman here present." She indicated Michael with an affectionate gesture. "Who knew how to see beyond appearances and recognize true value?" The following days marked the beginning of a new phase. Emily, strong with her diploma and acquired experience, decided to open her own design studio. But contrary to expectations, she didn't choose to establish herself in the upscale neighborhoods where prestigious architecture firms concentrated. She rented a space in a former tailor's workshop in Brooklyn, a stone's throw from their old apartment. "Are you sure about your choice?" asked Michael, intrigued by this decision. "Wealthy clientele will be less inclined to come all the way here." "I want to be accessible to all types of projects," she explained, "from modest renovations to large projects, and besides, this is where my roots are." Her studio, baptized Perspectives, rapidly developed a unique reputation in the field. Emily proposed rates modulated according to clients' means, allowing even modest families to access her services. This approach, initially considered idealistic by her peers, proved surprisingly viable, with word of mouth bringing her a constant flow of varied projects. Michael, inspired by her approach, began to reorient some activities of his group. He launched a foundation offering scholarships to young people from disadvantaged backgrounds to study architecture and building trades. The program included not only funding for studies, but also mentoring and internships in partner companies. "It's a drop in the ocean of inequalities," he admitted one day, as they visited the first cohort of scholarship recipients. But each transformed journey is a victory. The fifth turning point came when Jessica resigned, confessing to having acted out of jealousy, not of losing the man, but of losing the privileged position she had occupied for years. Her departure opened a space for a complete restructuring of the company, bringing new blood and more humanized visions. The resignation letter arrived on a rainy November morning, 2 years after the beginning of their story. Michael read it in silence, his face passing from surprise to a form of sad understanding. "Jessica is leaving the group," he announced to Emily, who was working on plans for an associative daycare center. "She's going to direct the European branch of an American conglomerate." Emily looked up, surprised by this unexpected news. "It's a remarkable opportunity for her," she commented cautiously. Michael handed her the letter. Beyond the usual professional formulations, Jessica had added a personal paragraph. "I must admit, Michael, that I acted badly towards Emily and you. It wasn't so much the fear of losing you as a potential romantic partner. We both know that door had closed long ago, but the fear of losing my position of influence with you professionally and personally. I saw in her a threat to the status quo I had carefully maintained for years. Today I recognize that my behavior was motivated by insecurity, not by the protection of your interests as I claimed. You both showed me, through your integrity, a different path. I am paradoxically grateful to you for this." Emily put the letter down, troubled by this unexpected confession. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "There's nothing to say," replied Michael, taking her hand, "except perhaps that the truth always ends up emerging." Jessica's departure created a temporary void, but also opened unprecedented possibilities. Michael took advantage of it to profoundly reorganize the structure of his company, promoting younger and more diverse talents, introducing social responsibility policies that would have seemed utopian a few years earlier. Their most ambitious common project took shape in the months that followed: the renovation of social housing in disadvantaged neighborhoods in the Bronx. Emily developed an innovative concept that significantly improved the residents' quality of life while respecting strict budget constraints. Michael made available the technical expertise of his teams and negotiated partnerships with local authorities. The first project in the South Bronx was a real challenge. The residents, accustomed to unfulfilled promises from authorities, welcomed the initiative with skepticism. Emily spent weeks meeting with families, listening to their needs, adapting plans to integrate their suggestions. "This is the first time anyone has asked for our opinion," confided a mother during a neighborhood meeting. "Usually, decisions made in offices by people who have never set foot here are imposed on us." The day of the inauguration of the first renovated apartments, the emotion was palpable. Families who had lived for years in precarious conditions were discovering bright, functional spaces, designed with as much care as the most luxurious residences. An 8-year-old girl timidly approached Emily. "Are you the one who designed my room? With the window that looks at the sky?" Emily crouched down to be at her height. "Yes, that's me. Do you like it?" The little girl nodded vigorously. "It's the first time I can see the stars from my bed." This simple phrase crystallized everything they had worked for: the conviction that beauty, comfort, and dignity were not privileges reserved for the rich, but fundamental rights. Michael, witnessing this scene, felt a profound emotion invade him. He who had spent years building luxury residences for the most fortunate was discovering a satisfaction of an entirely different nature. Not the superficial pride linked to prestige or profitability, but something more fundamental: the feeling of having truly improved lives. That evening, as they returned in silence, exhausted but deeply satisfied, he took her hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For showing me that true luxury isn't in materials or price, but in the intention and respect with which a space is created." But the definitive test came with the 6th turning point. Grandma Grace had to undergo a delicate medical intervention at Mount Sinai Hospital. During the 5 days she spent hospitalized, without sleeping properly, eating poorly, he was present without ostentation. He didn't send expensive flowers or offer a VIP suite. He simply remained by her side in the uncomfortable chairs of the waiting room, holding her hand when fear tightened, bringing coffee and serene words. It was there, in the unglamorous corridor of a public New York hospital, that she finally understood. True love doesn't reside in festive halls or luxurious apartments on Fifth Avenue. It resides in the simple places where someone chooses to stay when it would be easier to leave. It all started with a persistent cough that Grace minimized, attributing it to the change of seasons. But when Emily found her one morning, pale and breathless in her armchair, she insisted on an immediate consultation. The diagnosis fell like a cleaver, a severe pulmonary infection, complicated by a cardiac arrhythmia that required urgent intervention. At 81 years old, the risks were considerable. Emily was seized by a visceral panic at the idea of losing the last member of her family, her anchor, her moral compass. In the cold and impersonal waiting room of the emergency department, she tried to fill out administrative forms, but her hands were shaking so much that the words blurred before her eyes. A steady hand rested on her shoulder. Michael was there, his face grave but determined. "I've cancelled all my meetings," he said simply. "I'm staying with you." The hours that followed transformed into an anguishing vigil. The doctors explained the risks of the operation, the probabilities, using clinical jargon that seemed to strip the situation of all humanity. Emily listened, trying to assimilate the information while fighting the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. Michael remained silent, but present. He didn't try to comfort her with platitudes, didn't promise that everything would be fine. He was simply there, solid as a rock, offering his presence as his only support. The night before the operation was the longest. The hospital had agreed that Emily could stay beside her grandmother, and Michael had insisted on staying too, sleeping on an uncomfortable chair in a corner of the room. Around 3 in the morning, Grace woke up, tenderly observing this improbable tableau. Her granddaughter asleep, her head resting on the edge of the bed, and this powerful man curled up on an uncomfortable chair, his suit wrinkled, several days' stubble darkening his usually impeccable face. "Michael," she called softly. He opened his eyes immediately, as if he had been sleeping with one eye open. "Mrs. Parker, do you need something? Come closer, my boy." He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake Emily. "You really love her, don't you?" the old lady asked without preamble. Michael held her gaze, understanding the importance of this moment. "More than anything in the world," he replied simply. Grace nodded, satisfied. "I've observed many men in my life. Rich ones, poor ones, smooth talkers and quiet ones. I've rarely seen someone look at a woman the way you look at my Emily." She took his hand in hers, a familiar gesture that surprised Michael. "Promise me you'll take care of her, whatever happens tomorrow." "I promise you," he replied with a solemnity that resembled a vow. The operation lasted 7 hours. 7 hours during which Emily and Michael remained in the waiting room, sometimes silent, sometimes sharing memories, fears, hopes. He told her stories of his childhood in Connecticut, anecdotes he had never shared with anyone. She confided in him her wildest dreams, those she didn't usually dare to verbalize for fear they would seem presumptuous. In this impersonal place, under the harsh light of neon, in the smell of disinfectant and instant coffee, they reached a deeper intimacy than in the most passionate moments they had shared. When the surgeon finally appeared, his tired but serene face announcing the success of the intervention, Emily collapsed with relief in Michael's arms. He held her firmly, murmuring reassuring words, his own relief evident in the slight trembling of his hands. During the days that followed, he organized his schedule to be present as much as possible, bringing homemade meals, a skill he had secretly developed in recent months, ensuring that Emily took care of herself, serving as a buffer between her and the outside world that continued to turn, indifferent to their personal ordeal. It was during the last night at the hospital, as they shared a coffee in the deserted cafeteria, that Emily fully realized what she felt. "I love you," she said simply, the words escaping naturally without premeditation. Michael looked up from his cup, surprised not by the words themselves, but by their unexpected timing. "Is it the fluorescent lighting that's having this effect on you?" he gently joked. She smiled, shaking her head. "It's all of this. The uncomfortable chairs, the sleepless nights, the way you held my hand for hours without saying anything. How you learned to make coffee exactly the way Grandma likes it." She took a deep breath. "I realize that true love doesn't reside in grand gestures or spectacular moments. It's in these ordinary moments when someone chooses to stay when it would be so much easier to leave." Michael reached his hand across the table, entwining his fingers with hers. "In that case, I promise to stay. Today, tomorrow, and all the ordinary days that will follow." The day of the wedding, discreet and intimate in a mansion in the Hamptons, She wore a dress made by the neighborhood seamstress, and he gave up the Italian suit in favor of something simpler. Grandma Grace cried with joy, seeing her granddaughter realize dreams she hadn't even dared to dream. And when their hands met at the improvised altar in the garden blooming with jasmine and orange blossoms, his whisper echoed the promise of that first time. "Don't move. I promise to be gentle." But now, they both knew that true gentleness came from the strength of love, that chooses each day to stay, to grow, and to transform. The ceremony had been designed as a reflection of their story, a harmonious blend of simplicity and elegance, tradition and innovation. The 18th century mansion, nestled in a centuries-old park, offered a majestic but intimate setting. Emily had transformed the garden with floral installations that seemed to have grown naturally, creating a subtle dialogue between wild nature and cultivated refinement. The guests formed an eclectic assembly that would have been unthinkable a few years earlier. Real estate magnates mingled with artisans, diplomats conversed with the old Brooklyn neighbors, renowned architects exchanged ideas with workers who had worked on the social projects. This diversity, far from creating dissonance, composed a human symphony where each voice found its place. Grace, resplendent in a lavender blue ensemble specially created by a young designer from Michael's Foundation, sat in the front row. Her bright eyes followed every movement of her granddaughter, this child she had raised alone after the premature death of her daughter, this young woman who had worked so hard for every opportunity and who now radiated a simple and deep happiness. "Ready?" Emily whispered to her grandmother before walking down the aisle. Grace squeezed her hand, moved. "I've waited for this moment all your life, my darling." When Emily appeared at the end of the flower-lined path, a collective murmur of admiration ran through the assembly. Her dress, deceptively simple, was the fruit of a collaboration between the old Brooklyn seamstress and a talented but still little-known young designer. The flowing ivory silk perfectly embraced her silhouette, without excessive ornaments, but with artisanal details of extraordinary fineness, tiny hand-sewn pearls forming almost imperceptible patterns, evoking the stars that the little girl from the Bronx could now see from her window. Michael awaited her under an arch of jasmine and orange blossoms, dressed not in the custom Italian suit that his usual tailor had proposed, but in a more informal ensemble created by a young stylist who had emerged from the scholarship program he had founded. Their vows, pronounced with a clear voice despite the emotion, reflected the journey traveled. They spoke of bridges between worlds, overcome prejudices, essential values rediscovered. They evoked, without emphasis but with palpable sincerity, their commitment to continue creating together spaces, physical and emotional, where each could feel welcomed in their truth. "I promise you," Michael concluded, "to never forget that our greatest wealth lies in this ability to remain authentic with each other through all seasons of life." When they exchanged rings, unique creations by a young Brooklyn jeweler who had incorporated into the gold fragments of the first cookie that Emily had offered him, transformed into tiny inclusions through an innovative process, their hands met in a gesture both tender and solemn. "Don't move. I promise to be gentle," he murmured, echoing those words spoken years earlier in a Fifth Avenue beauty salon. Emily smiled, recognizing in this seemingly simple phrase all the depth of their shared journey. For both now understood that true gentleness did not reside in cautious gestures motivated by fear of breaking, but in that quiet strength that allows one to accompany the other through storms without ever letting go of their hand. The reception that followed was a hymn to the simple joy of sharing a precious moment with those we love. The menu, concocted by a collective of chefs from diverse backgrounds, celebrated the richness of American cuisine in all its diversity. Traditional dishes alongside innovative creations, noble ingredients married with humble but flavorful products. At the end of the evening, as the last guests danced under the luminous garlands, Emily and Michael discreetly slipped away to a small bench set apart, nestled between two ancient rose bushes. From there, they contemplated the scene. These different lives united for the time of a celebration, these worlds meeting thanks to their story. "We've created something beautiful, haven't we?" Emily murmured, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. "Much more than beautiful," he replied, gently caressing her hair. "We've created a space where everyone can be fully themselves, without masks or prejudices. Perhaps that's what true luxury is after all." Grace joined them, sitting gently next to her granddaughter. In silence, the three generations contemplated the starry sky, bound by a love that transcended differences in age, class, experience. "Sweetheart," Grace finally said, taking Emily's hand, "your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." In this garden, perfumed with jasmine and orange blossoms, under the starry sky of the Hamptons, three hearts beat in unison, testifying that beyond obstacles, prejudices, and fears, authentic love always finds its way, transforming not only those it touches but also the world around them. For it is these improbable encounters, these connections that defy conventions, that gradually weave the fabric of a more just, more inclusive society, where everyone can find their place without denying their origins or sacrificing their essence.